This revenge story contains intense acts of retribution that may be excessive and could be disturbing to some viewers.
I sit in our factory's dimly lit break room, nursing a cold cup of coffee, my mind racing back to the moment when everything changed. The fluorescent lights above flicker sporadically, casting jagged shadows on the cracked linoleum floor. The air smells faintly of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, a scent that clings to my work clothes no matter how many times I wash them. My hands tremble slightly, causing ripples in the lukewarm coffee. 4 years of marriage to Meredith, and despite our ups and downs, I never imagined she would betray me. Especially not with him. Shark. The name alone makes my jaw tighten, my fingers curling around the styrofoam cup until it creaks under the pressure. Shark wasn't just a bully in middle school. He was a predator. I can still see him clearly in my mind. Tall for his age, with a crooked grin that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He had a way of moving through the hallways like he owned them, his presence casting a shadow over anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. And I was his favorite target. I was the scrawny kid with thick glasses that never stayed straight, because Shark would snatch them off my face and bend the frames until they were barely wearable. He'd slam me into lockers, the metal doors rattling as my books spilled across the floor. "Oops," he'd say, his voice dripping with mockery. "Clumsy, aren't you?" The other kids would laugh nervously, too afraid to stand up for me. Even the teachers turned a blind eye, intimidated by his father's influence in our small town. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, it was the isolation. One by one, my friends drifted away, not wanting to become his next victim. I spent my lunch breaks hiding in the library, pretending to read while keeping an eye out for his shadow. The library became my sanctuary, but even there, I couldn't escape the fear. I'd jump at every creak of the floorboards, my heart racing, until I was sure it wasn't him. But Shark wasn't content with just making my school life a living hell. One day, he crossed a line that changed everything. It was behind the gym where the security cameras didn't reach. He'd cornered me there before, but this time was different. He didn't just hit me. He made sure I'd remember. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth as he leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "You're nothing," he hissed. "And you always will be." I tried to fight back once. Big mistake. He broke my nose that day, and I spent the rest of the week with 2 black eyes and a newfound understanding of my place in his world. After that, I stopped resisting. It was easier to just take it, to let him have his fun and hope he'd get bored. But Shark didn't get bored. He got creative. The memories flood back now, unbidden, as I sit in this dingy break room. The flickering lights remind me of the way the hallway fluorescents would buzz overhead as I scrambled to pick up my scattered belongings. The smell of burnt coffee mingles with the phantom scent of blood and sweat, pulling me deeper into past. My hands are still trembling, the coffee long forgotten. I glance at the clock on the wall. My shift ended an hour ago, but I can't bring myself to leave. The thought of going home to an empty house that still smells like Meredith's perfume makes my chest tighten. Instead, I sit here, trapped in this liminal space between the past and the present, wondering how the hell I ended up here. The break room door creaks open, snapping me out of my thoughts. Kevin pokes his head in, his glasses sliding down his nose as he gives me a concerned look. "You okay, man? You've been in here forever." I force a smile, though it feels brittle. "Yeah, just thinking." Kevin hesitates, then steps inside, closing the door behind him. He knows better than to push, but his presence is a small comfort. He's one of the few people who knows the whole story about Shark, about Meredith, about the fire. He doesn't say anything, just sits down across from me and pulls out his phone, giving me the space I need. I take a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The memories are still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but for now, I push them down. I can't afford to fall apart. Not yet. There's too much at stake. The fluorescent light above us flickers again, and for a moment, I swear I see Shark's face in the shadows, that same cruel grin plastered across his features. I blink, and it's gone, but the unease lingers. You coming? Kevin asks, standing up and slinging his bag over his shoulder. I nod, tossing the cold coffee into the trash. Yeah, let's go. But as we step out into the dimly lit hallway, I can't shake the feeling that Shark's shadow is still following me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One night, Shark committed an act so heinous it still haunts my nightmares. I was 13 years old, lying in bed, the faint glow of my digital clock casting a pale light across the room. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the calm before a storm. My parents were asleep down the hall, and my younger brother Tommy was in the room next to mine, his soft snores barely audible through the thin walls. I don't remember what woke me. Maybe it was the sound of breaking glass, or the faint crackling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. But when I opened my eyes, the air was thick with smoke, and the acrid smell of burning wood filled my lungs. I sat up, coughing, my heart pounding as I realized what was happening. Fire! I screamed, scrambling out of bed. My feet hit the floor and I stumbled the door, my pajamas clinging to my sweat-soaked skin. The hallway was already engulfed in flames, the heat so intense it felt like my skin was peeling away. I dropped to the floor, crawling toward my parents' room, but the fire was everywhere, consuming everything in its path. Mom, Dad! I shouted, my voice hoarse from the smoke. There was no answer, just the roar of the flames and the sickening sound of wood splintering as the house began to collapse around me. I tried to reach their door, but the heat forced me back, my hands blistering as I clawed at the floor. I turned toward Tommy's room, my vision blurry from the smoke and tears. Tommy! I screamed, but the fire had already reached his door, the flames licking hungrily at the frame. I could hear him crying, his voice small and terrified, but there was no way to reach him. The smoke was suffocating, my lungs burning with every breath. I knew I had to get out, but the thought of leaving them behind made my chest ache worse than the fire ever could. I crawled back to my room, the only place where the flames hadn't yet taken hold, and climbed onto the windowsill. The old oak tree outside was my only chance. I hesitated for a moment, looking back at the hallway where my family was trapped. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice breaking. Then I jumped, grabbing onto the nearest branch and scrambling down the tree as fast as I could. My hands were raw and bleeding by the time I reached the ground, but I barely felt the pain. I collapsed onto the lawn, coughing and gasping for air, my eyes fixed on the house as it burned. The flames reached into the night sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the neighborhood. I could hear sirens in the distance, but I knew it was too late. The firefighters arrived minutes later, their faces grim as they tried to control the blaze. I sat on the grass, my pajamas covered in soot, screaming their names over and over until my voice gave out. They found me there hours later, still clutching the grass as if it could anchor me to reality. The investigators ruled it an accident, faulty wiring, they said. But I knew the truth. Shark had been there that night, his face illuminated by the flames as he stood at the edge of the property, watching with that same cruel grin. He didn't even try to hide it. I spent the next few weeks in a daze, moving from one foster home to another. The insurance money eventually got me through community college, but no amount of money could fill the void left by my family. I tried to rebuild my life, to move on, but the memories of that night were always there, lurking in the back of my mind. The smell of smoke still makes my stomach churn, and the sound of crackling flames sends a chill down my spine. I've spent years trying to outrun the guilt, the what-ifs that haunt me every time I close my eyes. What if I'd been faster? What if I'd tried harder to save them? But the truth is, I couldn't save them. And no matter how much time passes, that night will always be a part of me, a scar that never fully heals. Years passed, and I tried to rebuild my life from the ashes. The insurance money helped me get through community college, where I studied mechanical engineering. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady was what I needed. After graduation, I landed a job at the local manufacturing plant, where I spent my days fixing machinery and my nights trying to forget. The factory was a noisy, chaotic place, filled with the constant hum of machinery and the sharp scent of oil and metal. It wasn't home, but it was something to focus on, something to keep my mind from wandering back to the past. I kept to myself, avoiding the break room chatter and the occasional after-work drinks. It was easier that way. Then I met Meredith. She was a nurse at the hospital down the road, and she'd come to the plant as part of a workplace safety initiative. I remember the first time I saw her. She was standing in the break room, her brown hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, her scrubs a stark contrast to the factory's grime. She had a kind smile, the kind that made you feel like she really saw you, not just the surface. "Hi," she said, holding out a hand. "I'm Meredith. I'm here to talk about first aid training." I shook her hand, surprised by how warm and steady it felt. "I'm Alex," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She stayed for an hour, going over basic first aid procedures with a small group of us. I didn't say much, but I found myself watching her, the way she moved with confidence, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about helping people. There was something about her that felt safe. After that, she started showing up at the plant every few weeks, checking in on the workers and making sure everyone was okay. We'd exchange small talk about the weather, about the latest safety protocols, but it wasn't long before the conversations grew deeper. One day, she caught me during my lunch break, sitting alone in the break room with a sandwich I wasn't really eating. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, already pulling out a chair. I shrugged, trying to seem indifferent, but I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Sure." We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing. She told me about her work at the hospital, about the patients she'd helped and the ones she couldn't save. I told her about the factory, about the machines I fixed, and the satisfaction of seeing them run smoothly again. And then, somehow, the conversation turned to the past. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said gently when I hesitated. But I did. For the first time in years, I wanted to tell someone. So I did. I told her about the fire, about my family, about the guilt that still kept me up at night. She listened without judgment, her eyes welling up with tears as I spoke. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But you're not alone anymore, okay? You don't have to carry this by yourself." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. We started dating not long after that. It was slow at first, both of us cautious, but it didn't take long for us to fall in love. She was everything I needed, kind, patient, understanding. She held me through the nightmares, her arms a safe harbor in the storm. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just the two of us and a handful of friends. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. But even then, there were cracks. Small things at first. The way she'd sometimes drift off in the middle of a conversation, the way she'd check her phone obsessively, like she was waiting for something. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. I should have known better. Then I noticed Meredith's strange morning ritual. Every day, without fail, she'd check this horoscope website before even getting out of bed. At first, I thought nothing of it. Plenty of people read their daily horoscopes, but something felt off. She'd become secretive about her phone, turning the screen away whenever I walked past. She started working late, claiming extra shifts at the hospital. One night, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. I found her in the living room, hunched over her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She jumped when she saw me, quickly locking her phone and forcing a smile. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice too bright. "What are you doing?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Just checking my horoscope," she said, but her eyes darted away, and I knew she was lying. The next day, while she was at work, I logged into her laptop. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It didn't take long to find the truth. The horoscope site was just a front. Shark was running it, using the platform to connect with women in unhappy marriages. He'd found Meredith through it, and they'd been having an affair for months. I found their messages, filled with secret meetups and promises of a future together. The rage hit me like a tidal wave, drowning everything else. This wasn't just about Meredith's betrayal. This was about everything Shark had taken from me. My family, my home, my sense of safety. All of it gone because of him. And now he'd taken Meredith too. I needed help to execute my revenge. So I turned to Kevin, my old friend from the IT department who'd recently started his own cybersecurity consulting business. When I showed him the Horoscope website and explained who ran it, he laughed grimly. "This site's security is a joke," he said, his fingers flying over his keyboard. "Shark never was very bright about technology. I can get in and modify the daily readings without leaving a trace." The plan came together perfectly. I spent weeks studying Meredith's browsing patterns, noting how she'd follow the site's advice without question. Kevin infiltrated the system, setting up a backdoor that let us control what she'd see. We crafted the perfect prophecy, a message about a life-changing meeting at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town where her true destiny would be revealed. The message was specific enough to draw both Meredith and Shark there. Her for the prophecy, him because she'd inevitably tell him about it through their secret messages, which Kevin had also discovered. As the day approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was it. My chance to make Shark pay for everything he'd done. I waited at the warehouse with a gas can in my hands, my father's old lighter burning a hole in my pocket. The setting sun cast long shadows through the broken windows, reminding me of that fatal night. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of rust. The silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling. My heart pounded as I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. I moved to the window, peering through the cracked glass as Meredith's car pulled up, followed closely by Shark's truck. My grip tightened on the gas can, my knuckles turning white. They stepped out of their vehicles, Meredith looking around nervously while Shark scanned the area with that same predatory gaze I remembered from middle school. He was older now, his face lined with age, but the cruelty in his eyes was unchanged. "This is it," Meredith said, holding up her phone. "The horoscope said to come here at sunset?" Shark smirked, his voice low and mocking. "Let's see what destiny has in store for us." I stepped out of the shadows, the gas can in one hand and the lighter in the other. They froze when they saw me, Meredith's face pale with shock while Shark's eyes narrowed in recognition. "Alex," Meredith whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" I ignored her, my gaze locked on Shark. "Remember me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He took a step back, his bravado faltering for the first time. "Alex, look, man, that was a long time ago. We were kids. I'm sorry, okay?" "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're sorry? You destroyed my life, Shark. You took everything from me. My family, my home, my peace. And now you've taken her too." Meredith stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just confused." Confused? I snapped, my voice cracking. You betrayed me with the man who ruined my life. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Shark held up his hands, his voice pleading. Alex, come on, let's talk about this. We can work something out. I took a step forward, the gas can sloshing in my hand. There's nothing to talk about. You took everything from me, and now it's your turn to lose. The smell of gasoline filled the air as I unscrewed the cap, the liquid splashing onto the floor. Shark's eyes widened in panic, and he took a step back, his hands trembling. Alex, don't do this, Meredith begged, her voice breaking. Please, I love you. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the lighter. The memories of that night came flooding back. The flames, the smoke, the screams. I could feel the heat on my skin, the weight of the guilt crushing me. But as I looked at Shark, at the fear in his eyes, something inside me shifted. I couldn't become the monster he was. I couldn't let the cycle of violence continue. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My voice was steady as I confessed everything. My plan for revenge, Shark's past crimes, the affair. When the police arrived, I was sitting quietly on the warehouse floor, the untouched gas can beside me. They arrested Shark after I provided evidence of his involvement in the fire that killed my family. Meredith left in tears, serving me with divorce papers the next week through her attorney. Instead of pulling the trigger on the lighter, I'd called 911. My voice, surprisingly steady, confessed everything: my planned revenge, Shark's past crimes, the affair. The operator, a calm, detached voice, guided me through the whirlwind in my head. When the police arrived, I was sitting quietly on the warehouse floor, the untouched gas can beside me. The officers moved cautiously, hands hovering near their weapons as they surveyed the scene. One of them approached, expression a mix of concern and suspicion. You hurt? He asked, voice firm but not unkind. I shook my head, eyes fixed on the ground. Number I didn't go through with it. They cuffed Shark first, reciting his rights as he protested, voice rising in panic. This is a mistake. He's lying. He's the one who... Save it for the station, one of the officers snapped, shoving him toward a patrol car. Meredith stood off to the side, arms wrapped tight around herself, face streaked with tears. She looked at me, pleading in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to meet her gaze. Another officer led her away, asking questions in a low voice. The next few hours became a blur. I gave my statement at the station, recounting everything. Shark's history of bullying, the fire, the affair, the whole revenge plan. Detectives listened carefully, faces unreadable. You got lucky you didn't go through with it, one of them said finally. You'd be looking at a lot more than a slap on the wrist. I nodded, too drained to reply. The following morning, I was released on bail, my lawyer arranging for me to enter a rehab facility as part of a deal. Meredith's lawyer served me with the divorce papers the same day, the envelope cold and impersonal in my hands. I didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight for. But the quiet of the house didn't feel like before. It wasn't my quiet. I knew it was a house with walls that couldn't hear the screams. But now the gears were turning. Shark's history, his web of lies, were being pulled apart thread by thread. News started trickling in. Old classmates came forward, sharing stories of Shark's cruelty and threats. The website Meredith found him on was revealed to be a front for something much darker. The detectives were tracking down financial irregularities and connections I never could have imagined. It felt like a dam had burst. Years of darkness finally getting some light. The news, when I could stomach to look at it, was a mix of anger, fear, and a strange kind of relief. He wasn't just a bully, he was a predator, and now that truth was coming out. Now, I'm in a rehabilitation facility, part of my deal. It's a quiet place, nestled in the countryside, surrounded by hills and dense forests. Walls are painted soft, neutral tones, and sunlight pours into the common areas. It's peaceful, but the calm still feels foreign, like waiting for the other shoe to drop. The counselors here are patient, their voices gentle as they guide me through therapy. We talk about the fire, about Shark, about Meredith. We talk about the anger that simmered for years, the guilt that was like a permanent weight. You made a choice, my therapist said one day, hands folded neatly on her desk. A choice to break the cycle of violence. That takes incredible strength. I want to believe her, but the words feel hollow. I didn't feel strong that night in the warehouse. I felt like a shattered piece of glass. I still do sometimes. Still, I keep going. Group sessions, listening to others share their stories of loss and betrayal. I start to see patterns, the way trauma twists into anger, the way anger consumes. During one particularly raw session, I found myself talking about my family again. About my parents, the way their laughter filled the house. About Tommy, his mischievous grin. The life we could have had if the fire hadn't taken them. Do you think they'd be proud of you? My therapist asked. The question caught me off guard. The silence grew as I thought. I don't know, I said finally. But I hope so. Weeks pass, and I notice small changes. The nightmares come less often, their edges softened by time and therapy. I breathe easier, the weight on my chest starting to lift. I still think about Shark, about Meredith, about the life I thought I had, but the anger doesn't burn as hot anymore. It's still there, but it no longer controls me. The weight feels different. One afternoon, I'm sitting on the patio, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The sun feels good on my face, the breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't get the revenge I wanted. I didn't make Shark pay for everything he's done. But I was part of the process of bringing his crimes into the light. And that, surprisingly, made a difference. I made the choice to walk away from the violence that haunted me so long. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. As I sat there, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, I thought of my family again. I imagined them watching me, faces filled with understanding. Maybe real strength wasn't about hurting others. Maybe it was about having the courage to stop, to choose a different path, and to find peace where I could, even if it wasn't how I imagined it. The world was quieter now, but the silence felt different too. It wasn't the deafening quiet of a home where no one could hear. It was a silence that allowed me to finally hear myself.